and a healthier pregnancy, and a healthier baby will live longer if it has a good start. You have the most leverage the earlier you start. So I figured, as an anti-aging guy, that I should start before we even conceived our kids. So I applied these biohacking principles that I write about towards how do we get the healthiest possible kids with the biggest brains that their genes and the environment can provide them. And that's what the book's about. In the process of doing that, I also have about 150,000 words on the blog, and I have a day job as a vice president at a big company. So as a writer, here's some of the technologies that I use and that I think other writers ought to consider using. You may have noticed, there's electrodes on my head there. We'll talk about what biohacking is and then I'll explain what's on my head. It's the idea that you can manage your nervous system using data and medical things and nutritional things. You can manage your low-level biology. This is different than quantifying the self where you might learn some conscious level things. I'm all about training and hacking the unconscious parts of your system, the automated parts that aren't working as well as they could be. Because when you change the low-level performance of a system, you can change high-level performance, the more cognitive actions, much more easily. So if you want to hack your brain, you start at the bottom of the stack, not the top, whether you're a writer or not. On my head, I have 2 electrodes. This will be the second time I've attempted to actively hack my brain while talking. The first time I did it was at a conference in Sweden. Unfortunately, I ran into a problem that will be an increasing problem for humanity, which is battery life. So I am not running a 50 hertz gamma current across my brain like I planned to be for this talk, because, well, my 9-volt battery was dead, and, well, that is what it is. So the electrodes will come off, but that's okay. I brought some other technologies to show you as we go on. It just so happens that using this is something that I really like to do. If I want to crank out really good stuff, I put myself in a gamma state for about 45 minutes doing this, and this is cerebral electrical stimulation. I'm actually running a current back and forth across my brain, and you get into a really good writing state. You generate great stuff quickly. Basically, if you wanted to shorten the biohacking thing, stronger, faster, smarter, sexier, better, and you're kind of transforming yourself, and you might die. Let's talk about something that doesn't usually kill you. This cool device may be familiar to some of you. It's called an M-Wave. It's made by the HeartMath Institute. And you use it to monitor your stress levels and to teach yourself when the spacing between your heartbeats becomes very even. That's a sign that you just kicked over from parasympathetic mode, where you're basically paying attention, writing from a good place, to stress mode. If every time you sit down to write, you kick yourself into the red zone on here, and it clips on your ear, and it takes a little while to get a good signal, and eventually it turns green if you're in a parasympathetic state. And it beeps too. So what's going on with a technology like this is that you're actually telling yourself, wait, I'm trying to write, but I'm stressed. The kind of stress this measures is reptilian survival kind of stress, the sympathetic nervous system. So if there's a part of your body that you're not conscious of that's afraid you're going to die every time you sit down to write, you might have writer's block. Just a thought. There's a whole book about how that improves your golf game too, but I'm not a golfer. It turns out that your heart actually talks to your brain more so than the other way around. There's a neurological signal that happens, an electrical one. There's a hormonal signal that goes between the two. There's a mechanical signal between the two, a pulse wave. And this is, I've actually seen the numbers from the HeartMath Institute's nonprofit research side. In fact, Roland, the chief scientist over there, is going to speak at the Bulletproof conference in January about exactly this kind of stuff. So there's an EMF field around your heart shaped like a donut, and we know which way it turns. It's a torus shape, et cetera, and there is some signaling between the brain and heart, we think, around that. So if you hack what's going on here, you're actually hacking what's going on up here, and you'll hack what's going on your keyboard. And just to put a sort of data signal on this is when I'm doing heart rate variability, I'm just consciously changing the spacing between my heartbeat versus when I'm not paying any attention at all and feeling stressed. If you have a signal when you're writing that tells you when you're doing that versus that, you can consciously do more of that, which makes you, I believe, a better writer. $200. This is a picture of my brain that I had taken with radioactive sugar. I don't recommend this for most authors. I got it because I was getting my MBA full-time at Wharton while working at a startup that we sold for $600 million later. My brain, all the red parts are where I don't really have the oxygen, I don't have the metabolic activity that I'm supposed to have. So you might want to look at your brain to figure out what parts of it are working, what parts aren't. And later on I'll talk about how you could fix this. But just having knowledge that some parts of your brain aren't working is good to happen. If you are under the misconception that your brain would be all green here, then good for you, but all of you have parts of your brain where your metabolism isn't working as well as it could be, and you can train those. You can write better, you can do all sorts of better things if you get your brain all the way working metabolically. By the way, the doctor said it was an interesting referral. Like, ew. This runs about $2,500 if you decide to get that done. You can train your brain. You want to write really well? Double your working memory. So 20 minutes a day RAM upgrade. It's free open source software. Dual impact training. I actually have something called Bulletproof Mindware that's not this, so pardon the slide there. This is hard work. It's frustrating. It'll piss you off, which is why it causes synaptogenesis over time. If you can remember 7 numbers when you complete this training, you can probably remember 7 numbers here and 7 numbers here, which gives you about 10 IQ points. I got 12 IQ points doing this in 20 days. And there's other things like you can do focused attention training. And I have a kind of software that was on Android that's not available now that I wrote. It'll come out available again soon. But what it does, it trains you to remember what happens when you're in a daydream state. Most of the time our brain's in a passive mode or it's in an active mode. And we used to think it was either or. It turns out it's a sliding spectrum. You're always in both modes. It's a question of degree. So if you want to tap your font of creativity, you need to be able to remember what happened when you were daydreaming. But most of us suck at remembering what happens when we're not paying attention to anything. This software, in about the same amount of time, it takes about 20 minutes a day, blindfolded, listening to sounds, with a relatively simple algorithm. But what it does is it teaches you to keep a thread of memory running when you're completely zonked out. And I use a bunch of different sounds to put your brain into a certain state. And then I just ask you to perform a very simple memory activity that will frustrate the living crap out of you. And if you keep doing it for a little while, you'll form the synapses to do it, and your ability to bring creativity into your work goes up, because when you stop paying attention, you're still remembering the cool stuff your brain does when you're not paying attention. The idea here is that you have delta, theta, alpha, and beta, and you can bring things from the unconscious into the conscious. If you just pay attention and remember to those states where you don't normally do that, that's where all the good stuff happens if you're a creative writer. $50 or less, $9 maybe. Electrical stimulation, why I started out here. There's TDCS, which can do kind of magic things for writing. If you're just sort of in a fog and stuck, you can run a little bit of current on the prefrontal cortex here or here, and you can turn your brain back on and your writing improves. There's a $99 do-it-yourself device, $400 device that's used for transdermal drug delivery. I have one of those guys. It's called the Chattanooga Iontro. There's a picture of how it works, the open source one. There's CES, which I was using before, which is different. With TDCS, you run a current here that comes out over here. With CES, you run a current back and forth and back and forth and back and forth to put all of the brain in the same state. The Russian space program invented CES for the coolest reason ever. They're like, it costs like a gazillion rubles to send an astronaut to space. So what if instead we just told the astronaut, don't sleep, so we can send half as many up into space? Well, 1/3 as many. So that's why CES was invented. So you can perform well and not die in a vacuum and without sleep. So I do use this, especially when I'm getting less sleep. And that's what I use when I'm writing to put myself into a 50 hertz state. Most devices you buy only put you into a single state. The one I have is programmable, but they're very hard to find programmable. Someone make one again. It turns out you can get alpha in the front of your brain, the relaxed alert state, just by running CES. And that's very well studied in a great PhD thesis. You can also do funny things like turn on CES at 10 hertz and look what it does to your heart rate variability. I'm not sure it's an improvement, but it does something to your heart rate variability. Costs you $100 or $500 if you want to be cool. Direct stimulation of the brain. Does anyone have a drill? It turns out you can stimulate the heck out of your brain, and you can do that with infrared light. This is a device you can't buy anymore. The guy who invented it figured out the right beam width and frequency to basically push infrared light using a very powerful LED through the skull and stimulate parts of the brain. He sold it online for about a year, and he used it on himself to the point he's like, oh my God, I turned my brain back on. He went back to med school and tried to delete everything. But I have the thing, and it absolutely works. You can also reset your circadian rhythm with it in one night. It's pretty cool. By the way, you want the specs? There they are. You actually cause more blood flow to the part of your brain that you shine this on, and it increases mitochondrial function by catalyzing it. Increases cell division, and you can use a laser. This is a laser. It is a unfocused laser. It doesn't hurt your eyes because it's basically defocused. But what this does, this is an FDA-approved device after 10 years of being sold without FDA approval for arthritis, but only in the wrist. The FDA does not believe it's okay to use it for arthritis in the fingers because it hasn't been proven to work. But in the wrist, it's okay. Before that, it was only for use on racehorses, where they pioneered the work, and NFL quarterbacks. You ever see one of those guys who runs 2 weeks after a knee surgery? They're using techniques like lasers to do that. But it just so happens, if you put this thing on your brain right here, and you're feeling not so good, it wakes you up in a very noticeable, very, very peaceful way. You can also put it on the back of your brain here. So I will admit, when I'm writing things and I'm stuck, I will laser the heck out of myself. And if you're feeling nauseous from writing, it'll fix that too. About $2,500, unless you want the high power attachment, another $1,700. This guy was $20 if you want to make it yourself. Your vermis is back in your brain, you do it along the midline. Then there's neurofeedback. Neurofeedback is the heavy duty stuff. It used to be expensive, but now it's $150. First off, you can help your brain optimize itself. What's happening there is your brain actually, well, it wants to optimize itself, but it's really doesn't have any nerves inside it. There's one nerve, the fifth cranial nerve, that's tied to your molars, goes into the brain. The rest of the time, the brain can see everything and smell everything all around you, but inside the brain, if you lift off your head, you can poke around and it doesn't even hurt. You break your arm, well, your arm has nerves in it that sense the damage and they get fixed. You whack your head, your brain won't fix itself because it doesn't know it's broken. Neurofeedback, get an electrical signal off the brain, play it back through the ears, lets the brain know where it's not working very well, and it will fill in the gaps all by itself without you doing anything. From there, you can actually learn how to control your brain, because when you get a signal, you can then consciously apply what you want to happen to your brainwaves. The only problem is, what protocols would you run? Do you want to train alpha in the front or in the back? Do you want to decrease theta, increase beta? So this is a pioneering area of neurofeedback. It's kind of cool stuff. And I've done some very heavy-duty stuff that is actually clinically shown to raise your creativity levels by 50%. And it sticks. SRI put a lot of the researchers through this program so they could have more creativity when figuring out new problems. The side effect of that is 12 IQ points when you do the expensive one. That's actually a picture of my brainwaves during the expensive one. There's not a lot of data for you to look at there. It's just that it is a data-driven thing. This is just a photo of their thing. The one that raises your IQ costs roughly $20,000. $150 open source with software and hardware you can buy online today. It's actually really good stuff. Then there's this one. Now, I keep hoping Victoria's Secret will come out with a model because, this just doesn't really look that cool. All right, this is part of my superpowers because now I look really dorky, but blue and gold look good together. Anyway, this is made by Jonathan Tuman. He's one of the pioneers in HEG feedback. So what we're doing is looking at blood flow in the front of the brain. Every 5 minutes or so of training on this thing raises your TOVA score, which is a clinical scale of how well you can pay attention about 1 point. This is really hard. It's like lifting weights with your brain again. It's not a comfortable process, and it's not like meditating or doing heart rate variability. But if you want to pay attention to what you're writing, this is an amazing way to train your brain to do stuff that you couldn't do before. So you can have focused laser attention for long periods of time. Let's see. You also can start feeling where your brain works, which is kind of cool. This isn't commercially available. It'll be called the Peanut when Jonathan ships it. I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to this being available, especially for people who need to pay attention. Then there's light. There's lots of hippie people who will tell you wearing orange glasses makes you look cool. But there's also a lot of work on moods and light, and I have a set of glasses at home with interchangeable lenses, and it's weird what will happen to your creative mind when you use lavender or yellow or green sorts of lenses. You wouldn't think that would make a difference, but it does. You want to stay up late and write all night? Bright lights, no amber lights. You want to write late at night but be a little calmer? Amber glasses, or just light bulbs that don't have a lot of blue spectrum. It really affects your cognitive state. And I'm going to go a little faster. We have about 3 more slides. First one, for sound entrainment, you have binaural beats. Listening to a drum, it's old, shamans do this. Binaural beats, singing bowl in each ear. These are very old ways of changing your brain states, which you can do as a writer. There's isochronic tones, there's white noise, all these change your mental state, which can make you a better writer. It's free, up to $250 for software and devices that do this. Oops, there we go. ProVigil, woo, my favorite. It turns out I did a test using quantifiedmind.com. Taking ProVigil makes me 14% faster with 6% less mistakes, and I'm more predictable. If you want to crank stuff out when you're writing, ProVigil is kind of a way to do that. It's pretty amazing what happens here. Finally, we're getting to the really good stuff. The enlightenment is fueled by coffee, and well, if you do a high-fat MCT oil-derived coffee recipe called Bulletproof Coffee, very good things happen for writing specifically. I'm not kidding. There's a study that says coffee puts you in the same state as Qigong, improves your short-term memory, which makes you a better writer, and the guy who wrote Singularity Rising, whose name just escaped me, which is embarrassing when I was making the slide, on page 112 says, I'd like to thank Dave Asprey for his Bulletproof Coffee because I just replaced a lot of my Adderall dosage with Bulletproof Coffee while writing this chapter. So this is a very strong mental stimulant when you do it right. Also, one of the projects the Dalai Lama is working on, I know for a fact, was written entirely on ProVigil because the guy was stuck for 6 weeks. He couldn't get past it. He took one ProVigil, and lo and behold, the next morning he was done with his proposal and it was accepted. Way cool. Well, it's coffee. Total cost for everything I just talked about here, if you were to go balls to the wall, including the expensive neuroimaging stuff, is about $10,000. It's less than a lot of cars. So you can hack yourself pretty darn extensively and potentially be a better writer. That said, I'm done. Open for questions if there's enough time. Question?
Could you open a gym?
Yeah, in March or April in San Francisco, I plan to open a coffee shop that has half the biohacking stuff in the back. So you'll be able to get access to these things for a gym-like fee. It'll probably be in San Francisco. Anyone want to fund me?
Awesome.
For the noise recommendations, including white noise, do they need to be through headphones to be effective? Can they not be mixed in with other noise? And does the sound system matter a lot?
Question is, does the sound system matter a lot? It actually does matter, especially if you're doing like a small frequency variance. So if you're trying to play a tone in one ear and a slightly different tone in the other ear to generate a beat across your brain, which is the way Monroe Institute and a lot of the binaural beats work. Well, if you can't reproduce the lower frequencies, which are actually stronger, that'll be a problem. So you need accurate frequency rendering. If you're using basically not too low of a bass, you can put a speaker by each side of your head. In fact, you might have seen a picture of me there with a speaker by each side of my head. When I'm using this stuff, I actually put a speaker by each side of the bed, a directional speaker, not the little ones that are meant to be non-directional, and I'm fine. But they do work better for some of these with headphones. And other sounds on top of it is usually okay, but white noise is best by itself, or with binaural beats.
Through headphones?
Yeah. Actually, if it's just white noise, you don't need headphones. That's the one exception.
Yeah, since you're reinforcing the very positive words given to some of the cognitive enhancers, like ProVigil, I'd like to express a contrary opinion, having a fair bit of experience with that myself and having looked at the studies. I read some portion with that. I think some people can have side effects. Early on when I first took it, many years ago, I got some pretty bad itching going on, for instance. I also got tolerance to the effects. And more recent studies suggest that people with addictive personalities could become addicted to it and probably will lose the good effects and then some of the bad effects. So there should be some portions that go along with the recommendations.
There's no doubt this isn't a full, expose on ProVigil's effects. I absolutely think that the street value among addicts for ProVigil is approximately 0, which is a pretty good sign that compared to the other addictive substances like Adderall, it's in a different class. So my wife is a physician who practiced in drug and alcohol addiction for a few years, and it's not a commonly abused addictive drug. I took my dose from 400 when I started 8 years ago down to 100 and sometimes even 25 or none, with multiple periods of not using it to test for addictive effects. And it's possible some people could get addicted to almost anything, and some people do have the itching effect, which is caused by histamine, and you stop taking it there. So definitely no drug is for everyone, I would agree.
But it doesn't have to be to a level of addiction, it can just be a level of abuse.
There's a level of kicking ass, yeah.
Yeah, I have Benadryl and I use it when I'm traveling and
Yeah.
I need to give talks and I need to be alert. But I have to be very careful with it because of the caffeine aspect of it, the speed aspect, which doesn't work with my body. So I have to cut it in half to even get any element of effect by it, but still there's incredible caution with it. So the assistant shouldn't be flipped. I mean, this is very serious stuff.
There's no doubt about it. Anytime you take a smart drug, it's very serious stuff. But authors who use smart drugs might have more success writing, but obviously your mileage may vary. For instance, another common one, choline. A third of people have too much choline. They take more choline, they can drive themselves into chronic fatigue. That's bad. That's why some of the toxic pesticides we use are basically they kill you by inhibiting your ability to remove choline. So for a third of us, or 2/3 of us, it's great stuff. For the rest of us, we should be taking smart drugs to drive down our choline levels. So it's very individualized. You have to know your brain if you're going to do any sort of this stuff. But if you're an author who's looking for a boost, there's lots of even very low-grade smart drugs, unlike modafinil here, that work well. But I tell you, if I wanted to write my ass off and do a book in a few days, I'd be using Bulletproof Coffee and modafinil and piracetam and aniracetam as my first-line drugs all the time.
Can you go over your procedure for making the Bulletproof Coffee?
All right, brew 2 cups, 400 milliliters of coffee, add 1 to 5 tablespoons of grass-fed unsalted butter. I usually use Kerrygold because it's widely available. The silver label is the one you do. Add 1 to 2 tablespoons of MCT oil. If you put too much MCT oil in, you will poop on yourself, so don't put too much in. No, it's not coconut oil. Coconut oil is about 52 to 60% a mix of all 4 types of MCT, but the kind of MCT I'm talking about is 15% of coconut oil. So 1 tablespoon of what I'm talking about is 6 tablespoons of coconut oil, which will also make you poop on yourself. So this is the 2 lengths, C8 and C10, that are most correlated with stopping Alzheimer's disease. I've had people contact me and say, a guy with narcolepsy said, I started doing this stuff, magically my narcolepsy went away, and I'm down from 20 episodes a day to 1 episode a day, I got my life back. People with migraines, they get their lives back. The MCT is helping the metabolism of your brain very directly, and it's been used by one of the guests on my podcast to reverse Alzheimer's disease in her husband. She's a physician who did that.
What's the brand of your oil?
The MCT oil, it's upgraded MCT oil. I bought the pharmaceutical grade stuff they're selling as a drug, and I bottle it as a nutritional supplement. So it's the purest stuff you can get.
Can you drink Turkish coffee, Arabic coffee?
Can you drink Turkish or Arabic? You can brew it however you like. However, if you want the maximum cognitive boosting effects of coffee for writing or other activities, don't use a paper filter. There's 2 diterpenes in coffee, caffestrol and cowahol, which are correlated with very strong anti-inflammatory properties in the brain. When you're feeling a bit foggy as a writer or as an author, what's going on there is, in some cases, there's a little bit of inflammation in the brain, oftentimes tied to stuff going on in your gut, nervous system things, or immune system things. This is like aspirin for the neurons in your brain. So at least French press. The other thing is, 91% of coffee from South America has toxic mold in it. And if you're drinking coffee that is not very carefully selected using the protocol on my site, or my coffee that's tested and verified to be mold-free, you need to do that if you want maximum performance. Coffee that makes you go up and then crash, has crap in it like histamine or mycotoxins or ochratoxin A, which you don't want if you want to completely be dialed in. So that's why I recommend super good coffee, single estate, Central American, and hopefully processed like mine. I don't know how we're doing on time, but I'll answer questions all night, so someone tell me when to stop.
So which of the brain techniques that you described has been basically the best bang for the time invested?
The best bang for the time invested is probably the heart rate variability training. Because if you do it for 10 minutes a day for 6 weeks, you'll learn the skills. You'll learn when your reptilian brain, your brainstem, and your mammalian brain, your midbrain, are activating without you knowing it. And once you have that, like you've kind of like, wow, now I understand what's going on and I know how to turn it off. So that you get 2 skills in 10 minutes a day for 6 weeks. If you want to go a number of days involved, the 7-day, $15,000 neurofeedback course that gives you 12 IQ points and a 50% creativity boost, like relatively large amount of time, large amount of money, but the benefits are kind of big. That puts you in the level of an advanced Zen master in terms of what your brain can do.
And how persistent are those effects?
I can't quite hear you.
Yeah, how persistent are those effects?
How persistent are the effects of which one? The neurofeedback? Well, there's a study that shows they're stable 1 year later, and I haven't gone back after 2 years after I went back. They were stable, but it's hard to test your IQ every 6 months because you get really good at taking IQ tests. But overall, it appears to be stable, and certainly there's a difference that sticks. All right, we're done.